I said 1 p.m. and I was like,
Oh,
1 p.m. in the morning.
No, but we're as close to the full moon rising now is as close to the full moon as a rising
yeah.
full moon will get.
Right. Yes, it'll be less full tomorrow. Happy birthday. Congratulations.
They're all big ones.
Oh, from now on. Oh, yeah.
Probably. Probably start when Mars and Moon start to Mars retrograde start their work for the
There's a good thing though. I still have leap year. Well, what's that? And Thursdays. Just on a regular Monday and Friday. Yeah.
And then what, the 10th?
Yeah, 10th.
So it really doesn't matter which one that leap year falls. They just do it once a year. And rising moon retrograde is always That's true. Yes. I did the year before he did.
Yeah.
Lights on.
Huh?
Is he putting lights
I
on?
think we're ready.
Do we have lights on? Do we need more lights?
Do they not have lights?
Well, they do if there's if we're if I stand here and well,
That would be
impossible.
that would be yeah, something to film. That's for sure.
Yeah.
This is the astrology of 4 days.
It is. It is. It's actually, yeah, Polish.
Polish.
Polish pole dancing.
Oh my gosh.
It's the best.
Check, check. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Soul Food Books. Can I hear a holler if you're alive and awake tonight? What a beautiful day it was today. We got a little bit of sunshine today. And tonight we are dedicated to Astrology Night, the first Wednesday of every month. Please welcome back Rick and Jeff for Astrology Night.
Good evening. Hello? Oh, okay. Good evening. Welcome to Astrology Night,
Hello.
as Clint said. Before we get going with the program, we've got a couple of events we want to talk to you about. In our area, the Northwest Astrology Conference, an annual event, which is usually done at the end of May, will instead this year be April 6th through 8th.
On my birthday.
On Rick's birthday. He's got a 3-day birthday, which is pretty amazing. You can.
And not only that, I get to deliver the opening keynote address for the conference for my birthday present
Oh,
to
that's
myself.
great. To yourself. If you want to know about this wonderful family-oriented conference, if you haven't been to an astrology conference before, it's a great way to make new friends, to learn about this fascinating subject. Go to Astrology et al. That's Astrology, E-T-A-L, all one word, .com, and you will find out all the details you need to know about NORWAC. After that, in late May is the big kahuna, the United Astrology Conference. It's every 4 years. Somewhere on the order of 2,000 astrologers show up to share days and days of lectures, workshops, friendship, and all sorts of other events. If you'd like to know about the United Astrology Conference, you can pick up one of these brochures that are over here. I'll leave them on this table over here, and feel free to pick one up whether you want to come or not.
Yeah, the United Astrology Conference, UAC, is like the coolest event in astrology. I mean, it is the biggest astrology conference. It's a lot of fun, and there's enough lectures to fill your head for a long time.
And the last item we want to share with you is to talk about our annual event in Bali, biannual event. Rick and I have been teaching astrology in beautiful Bali, Indonesia. We've done it 3 times. We're going back this year, but it's really going to be different. We will have first a workshop on astrology and relationships, and that's going to be in the rice fields outside of Ubud, which is the cultural capital of Bali. And then we're going to switch and go to the beach and do some work on the magic of the zodiac. You can find out about the work that Rick and I are doing in Bali by going to stariq.com. That's all one word, stariq.com, and clicking on the link on the front page there. Okay? You got a working mic, Rick?
Well,
Mike Stan. And if you're interested in knowing about any of the Bali workshops, I have some information here. I'll put them on the front table. Please feel free to pick one up.
Thank you, sir. I'll figure it out.
What we're going to do, as we do every month here on Astrology Night, is Rick and I are going to talk about the upcoming astrological cycles for the month of March. We do this on the first Wednesday every month. We've been doing this, I don't know, about 3 years now. And so we will start out by describing the collective cosmic weather, what the astrological influences are that affect us all. After about a 40-minute presentation, we're going to take a short break, and then we're going to come back and look at 3 individual birth charts. We'll do mini readings of just a few minutes each so that you can see what individualized personal astrology looks and sounds like. If you are interested in having your chart looked at after the break, please write down your first name, your time, your date, and your place of birth. Put it on a piece of paper, drop it over here, and then we'll do a drawing on the break, and 3 people will get their charts looked at. So with some further ado, or no further ado, let's talk about what's going on astrologically here in the month of March.
Well, you know, this idea of astrologers using computers or looking up things in tables even is relatively recent. In olden days, astrologers had to actually go out into the night sky and look up. Now, I don't know if anyone looked up on their way here this evening, but we have an incredibly fabulous full moon just rising over the horizon, and it is closely aligned with a bright red star that was visible when I drove over, and the moon, the full moon, which is exactly full later tonight, actually at about
1:39 in the morning.
So in a few hours. But the moon is actually now just coming into a conjunction with Mars. And if you look in the sky when you leave, the moon will have risen a bit more, but the moon will be about that height, and Mars will be about that height just above it. So that's Mars that's next to the moon. And interestingly, if you swipe all the way around to the horizon, you can see Venus and Jupiter on the western horizon, because right now all the inner planets are visible in the night sky.
Yeah, and I think what Rick has done is put his finger on couple of the key astrological patterns that are in effect now and will be with us for the next week or so. Mars, the planet of action, aggression, initiative, is going backwards through the sky. It's in a retrograde period. While Mars is retrograde, which it will continue to do until the 13th of April, it may be a little bit harder to launch new projects. Mars has to do with how we go beyond the Earth's orbit, how we go beyond the world as we know it and punch into new territory. And when planets are retrograde, that is, they're apparently moving backwards, from our perspective here on Earth, it's a little bit more difficult to grasp their energy and make them work. So this full moon is conjunct a retrograde Mars in Virgo.
And in fact, Mars is technically in its full phase right now. Mars has been, actually it was just a couple days ago on the 3rd, Mars was exactly opposite the Sun. Astronomers call this Mars in opposition. We astrologers would call it Mars in opposition to the Sun. And what it means is, as the Sun is setting, Mars is rising, which is what a full moon is. When the Sun sets, the moon rises, which is why now Mars and the moon are so closely aligned in the sky. And what this full moon does is it re-emphasizes the already retrograde Mars that Jeff had talked about, because Mars is closer to the Earth now than it ever is, which is why it's so bright in the sky. It looks redder and brighter than usual. And as the full moon joins it in Virgo, we get this tension between Virgo, the need to analyze and make use of what we know in a critical fashion. We get a tension between that and the Sun in dreamy, spaced out Pisces, that's just kind of wanting to float off into the imagination. And both of these extremes have a purpose. And while Mars and the moon are opposite the Sun, we may feel like we're in the middle and not know which way to go.
Yeah, and that happens, of course, every month we have a full moon. And when the Sun and the moon oppose one another, we're encountering opposition within ourselves. And the opposition, as Rick pointed out, is between the Sun in spiritual, go with the flow, I'm okay, you're okay, who really cares, Pisces, with the
really
moon.
knows.
Right, who really knows Pisces, exactly, with the precision, the specificity, and the practicality of Virgo. So on the one hand, you might want to be in a spiritual place or just listen to music or get away from it all, but the niggling little details of unfinished tasks and daily work, as represented by Virgo, are pulling us and tugging us from the other side. Well, I think a potential positive application of this full moon is the recognition that whatever your dreams are about, which is what Pisces is associated with, whatever your dreams are about can be turned into reality if you're willing to come down to earth and get the discipline and the healthy habits it takes to weave the concrete and practical web that's required to hold that dream. So we have an opportunity now to recognize what kind of work may be required to move our lives up to another level of inspiration.
Yeah, and it's really, I think that's what you said is really important, Jeff, because in some ways this full moon is more significant than other full moons, and it's not just because of the aspects it's making, because the moon has come across or has lined up with Mars, and you can see the full moon opposite the Sun, that fat red line showing that tug of war that Jeff was talking about, or the opposition tug of war that I was talking about. But even as the moon moves away this way, Mars, which is retrograde, continues to back up in the sky, and as it does, this pattern becomes the predominant pattern. And so this moon, even though what you said, it gives us that ability, or maybe maybe the thing that we can do is to weave, as you said, the two ends of the spectrum together into an integral whole. The fact is, as the full moon begins to wane, we are left with a fabric that then we can work with over the days ahead.
Yeah, the blue lines represent harmonious relationships between planets. And those are trines, angles of 120 degrees. And what you can see, whether you know astrology or not, is that there's a big blue triangle here. That's called a grand trine. And a grand trine is when 3 or more planets line up at 3 points equidistant from one another. This is considered to be the most harmonious possible relationship that we can have among planets in astrology. This one, we'll break it down for you in a moment, but this one has 4 planets, Venus and Jupiter, Mars and Pluto, all forming a grand trine in practical Earth signs, in the bring it down to Earth, make it real signs of Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. And what that suggests is that even though the sun is in spacey, dreamy Pisces, we are coming in over the next few days to an extraordinarily rich period for being realistic, strategic, and productive.
Extraordinary
Yes.
keyword. Yeah. It's really very cool because not only is the grand trine, and you'll notice that Mars is at 9 degrees of Virgo, an Earth sign. Venus and Jupiter are at 9 degrees of Taurus, an Earth sign. And Pluto is at 9 degrees of Capricorn, an Earth sign. And just the mathematics of how astrology works is such that these planets, as Jeff said, all equidistant to each other, make this stabilizing pattern. And as Jeff said, this is arguably the most wonderful of all the configurations that can be up there. However, the most wonderful individual 2 planets considered by the ancients are Venus and Jupiter. And when they align every year and a half or so, that's considered to be a wonderful thing unto itself. And they do it on the day of and part of this larger pattern. This is like double cool.
Yeah. Venus.
Not on the day of the full moon, on the day of
Next week.
This is on the 14th. This is already coming into play now, but we'll feel it most exact on the 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th. The 14th is actually mathematically the closest of the alignment.
Now, what's really interesting, in principle, this harmonious alignment means that these 4 planets are singing in tune with one another, but they belong to 2 very different categories.
Yeah.
As Rick pointed out, Jupiter and Venus, which were called the benefics in traditional astrology, are sweet and generous and loving and into pleasure. And the other pair, Mars and Pluto, are into moving things, getting things done. They're sort of
beating
sharp-edged.
things up.
Yeah, so it's almost like making a sweet and sour dish, with Venus and Jupiter representing the sweetness of love and beauty and pleasure and self-worth. That's Venus. And optimism and expansion and good fortune. That's Jupiter. And they're hooked up very nicely to spicy Mars and spicy Pluto, which suggests the possibility of taking something that's really sweet or beautiful in art or in relationship or in a financial interest and finding the muscle to get it done.
Yeah, in a way, it's like taking something, as you said, that's light and easy and beautiful on the surface and not losing that light and easy, beautiful surface, and yet at the same time, going deep, going to the base of it all, to the source, to the origin, to the shadows where the magic happens.
Yeah, and there's a lot of magic here. Just the Venus-Jupiter conjunction, which Rick pointed out, happens about every year or so. Venus rules 2 signs, Taurus and Libra. So this conjunction only occurs in one of Venus's home signs about every 6 years. The fact that Venus and Jupiter are joining together in the earthiest, chunkiest, most luscious sign in some ways Taurus.
The
really-
most sensual, even,
Absolutely.
of the senses.
Absolutely. But one of the things that happens sometimes is that this Venus and Jupiter part of ourselves can bring us into a place of self-indulgence, or perhaps in wondering whether we're really worth it. And this harmonious alignment with Pluto, the mythological lord of the underworld, says, you know, if you have a good idea, if you have something that's worthwhile, and you can't see the resources to make it happen, look a little deeper, dig a little deeper. You may be able to transform your trash into gold to finance something that's interesting to you. Because Pluto is about the recovery of that which is hidden or lost. And Pluto's harmonious relationship to Venus and Jupiter says, look, instead of pressing your nose against the window in Nordstrom and looking at that item that you would love but you couldn't possibly afford, keep your eyes open. You may find goods or services that you can exchange or to get the money to do that. But the point is that this is a good week to be resourceful, and not resourceful simply to survive, but resourceful to bring some luxury into your life.
Now, the problem in astrology, or with life in general, is that things are never as simple as they appear, even when they appear simple. And although this is a lot of good news, and I'm not taking away any of the good news that this is, the fact is that we jumped ahead and we jumped past Mercury's turning retrograde just after the full moon, just prior to this grand trine. We'll come back to that in a moment, because retrograde Mercury has a particular series of situations or problems that it can exacerbate. But into this perfectly juicy, wonderful, sensual, grand Earth trine, we do have Mercury retrograde. And on top of that, also, Jeff talked about earlier, we both did actually, we also have Mars retrograde. One of the points of this grand trine is retrograde. And so even though there's potential for forward movement, even though we are planting seeds for the future, we can frustrate ourselves because we're not getting there apparently. Apparently, we're not getting there as quickly or as we think we should. We may even feel like we're losing ground. We may feel like we're not making the progress that we theoretically should based upon all the things that we're doing right. And it's okay. It's okay. Don't make those judgments, because time will unfold the deeper meaning of this.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And let's add on to Mercury. Mercury is the messenger of the gods, spins around the sun from a sun-centered point of view in only 88 days. It's the fastest moving of the true planets. And 3 times a year, Mercury goes retrograde, meaning that it appears to move backwards from our perspective here on Earth. And the 3-week Mercury retrograde period is well known in the astrological world to mess up communication, details, conversations, all of those things with which Mercury is associated. This Mercury retrograde that we're coming into, I think, is a particularly complicated one. And the reason is that on March 2nd, Mercury, which is how we see and think, Mercury fired into Aries. So when Mercury goes into Aries, the mind wants to move quickly. But as it moved into Aries, it began slowing down in preparation to go retrograde or backwards. So here we had this big, juicy grand trine in Earth, which says, if you trust your body, trust your instincts, stay connected to the ground, it's a really delicious time. And yet, the mind is likely to be agitated, because Mercury, the planet of intellect, is in Aries going, I'm in a hurry to go somewhere, but I'm in a hurry going backwards. How the hell am I supposed to get there? That alone is a little bit complex. Mercury's going to slip all the way back into super slippery Pisces, and Mercury's going to join ingenious but crazy-making Uranus. So it's almost as if there are 2 systems at work. There's an intellectual system, which is buzzing and speedy and nervous and jumpy and maybe brilliant and insightful, but not very patient. And there's a body pace that says if we can slow down and smell the flowers, we're going to be enriched. by nature and the material world around us. So I think half of the issue this month is sort of being able to shift gears.
I think we might slow down and drink the coffee instead of smelling the flowers. Yeah, you said earlier when we were talking about this before we got here that you said it in reference to a particular day, but it's really in reference to the month, and that is we have an interesting problem with rhythm. You know, it's almost like the drummer that has two very different beats going on that can actually maintain those two very different beats. And going back to the beginning of March where Mercury was in Pisces, if I'm going to run this forward a few days, forget about all these lines, just look at Mercury moving into Aries, where not only does it hurry up into speedy Aries, but it immediately meets up with crazy, wild, radical, unconventional, futuristic, technological Uranus, kapow, lightning striking, new ideas. This is crazy making. And then Mercury slows down, stops, reverses, and goes back over. Watch, I'm going to run this forward. So there's Mercury moving into Aries. And there it catches up with Uranus and crosses over Uranus.
That was a couple of days ago.
Yes, and now on the 12th, it turns retrograde. It then begins to move backwards, and on the 18th and 19th, it then catches back up with, or reverses back into Uranus to go backwards over that crazy spot again, and then it backs up by March 24th back into Pisces, and we'll save the rest of the story until next month, perhaps. Or the rest of Mercury's story.
Yeah, so I think in addition to being able to manage pace, it's also about recognizing when the mind is panicking. You know, I like to be as positive as I can about astrology, but this is a pretty sort of nervous and panicky retrograde Mercury that we're coming into.
I agree.
Now, that doesn't mean we're all going to be nervous and panicky and crazy in the 3 weeks that follow. Each one of us has our own charts and our own lives and our own stories to play it out. But I think a smart thing to do is, if you get a brilliant new idea or you get an urgent piece of news, take a breath, slow it down, because it's almost as if the mind is creating an illusion that things are more critical than they are.
Agreed.
Yeah. So it's not to say that people won't have crises. People do have crises. But it's almost as if you're in a car. You're in this big, fancy car, comfy. There's a bar inside. There's all sorts of this wonderful music, maybe live music playing. It's a limo, and you're having a great time. And outside, there's a riot going on. Buildings are burning down, stuff is happening. And the question that I think we're faced with is, do I enjoy the environment that I'm in, or do I respond to my own physical sense of what's real and comfortable for me, or do I react to the chaotic conditions that are going on outside the window? So that's, I think, a major choice we have this month.
Yeah, and again, I'm going to just come back and say what Jeff said earlier, and I already repeated once. I'm going to repeat it again. This month is an interesting play on rhythmic dissonance, because there are things that are moving absolutely at the perfect pace, and all is well in the realm of physical, in the realm of sensual, in the realm of good taste. And yet at the same time, the busy mind, the monkey mind, is spinning around in circles. The hamster wheels are running. They're running backwards even. And we're making ourselves a little crazy, working ourselves into perhaps an unnecessary panic or worry. And yet, we don't want to shut that off. This isn't about going to just the pleasant rhythm and not dealing with the mental any more than it's about avoiding the pleasant and just going to the mental. The trick or the practice here is to practice like that drummer doing the two different rhythms simultaneously, is to be aware of which is which as it's unfolding.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And a key piece of all of this is Pluto. Pluto is the planet of death and rebirth, addition by subtraction, learning to grow by letting go. And the fact that Pluto is part of this grand trine says, you know, maybe you're aspiring to things or holding on to things that just cost too much. Whether it's an aspiration that really you've outgrown and doesn't fit into your immediate needs, or whether it's a belief system that you hold that doesn't work, or maybe it's something physical that you think you need for your comfort, and maybe you don't. There is something here, even though these two planets in Taurus just want to be Scrooge McDuck diving into the pile of money and having a direct, sensual, and physical contact with riches, whether it's the riches of money or whether it's the riches of material that feels good on your skin. And yet Pluto's trine says wealth is also about being willing and able to let go. That there are things, values, people, objects, and aspirations that just might, even if you could fulfill them, if you think it through or if you feel it through, you may recognize that the reward isn't necessarily worth it. There's lots of times in life when we lose something we think we can't live without. And we find out 3 months or 3 years or somewhere in between later that we're better off. And I think that's part of this process as well.
Yeah, I think the transformation here is unavoidable and beneficial. And yet, while we're moving through it, we may not realize what the ultimate consequences or ramifications are.
Yeah, it's almost as if the best way to have a rich life is to honor death. You know, Steve Jobs thought that death was just a wonderful thing because it sort of cleaned things up. And
Well, that's easy for him to say.
Well, he said it while he was still alive.
Never
oddly
mind.
enough. But that is an important part of the life process, is that willingness to live in the present. And there's so many things, whether it's values that you got from your parents or friends and colleagues that maybe you're outgrowing now. And the thing is that if you abandon a belief or a set of expectations, which is Jupiter, you may replace it with something that's going to be considerably more rewarding. Taking that risk is probably not that risky this month.
Yeah, I agree. And in fact, not taking the risk is what's risky.
That's right.
Okay, now as we move beyond this grand trine period on the 12th, 13th, 14th, you can see the thickness of those blue lines begin to wane.
And the closer the angle is to exact, the thicker the lines are.
And so as they begin to wane, we begin to move into another period or another phase where over the course of a few days, and we'll break this down in a moment, over the course of a few days, retrograde Mercury joins again wild and crazy Uranus, kind of re-stimulating some of the issues from the beginning of the month around the 4th, 5th, when it did the first time. Then the Sun moves from Pisces into Aries. This is the spring equinox, the beginning of the new beginning of the astrological year, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. So we have Mercury retrograding into Uranus, the Sun moving from Pisces into Aries, and then a new moon and Mercury retrograding back into Pisces. There's 4 separate things here, but they're all important, and they're important that they happen within just a few days of each other. It's a radical shift from this sweet grand trine energy that we've had.
Absolutely, and we're getting ready for seasonal change. March 20th or 19th?
Yeah, 20th.
20th, the Sun goes into Aries, which is the first sign of the zodiac.
Actually, the 19th at 10:14 p.m.
So
right there.
West Coasters, it's the 19th. East Coasters, Europeans, it's and Asians in Asia, it's the 20th. But this is the beginning of a new astrological year. Every year on the vernal equinox of the first day of spring in the northern hemisphere, the Sun moves into Aries, the pioneering, fiery first sign of the zodiac. So that means a couple of things, at least. One is that there's a whole new wave of energy, not just a seasonal energy, but an annual energy, a little
Right.
juice, a little boost, just as the plants are coming to life, the buds are beginning to bud. That's the sun going into Aries. But until we get there, we're at the end of the astrological year. And the end of any cycle, as I often talk about here, can be a period of time in which the wave of the past feels like it overwhelms our capacity to manage our lives in the present and direct it where we want to go in the future. At the end of a cycle, at the end of the zodiac with the sun in Pisces, at the end of the winter, the termination point of the astrological year, it's almost like seeing the year again, revisiting what has come before. And particularly now with Mars retrograde and then Mercury going retrograde, if it's Groundhog Day for you, metaphorically, that is, seeing something that you thought you'd done already and seeing it again, it's time to sum things up. It's time to allow yourself to step back, to review, to have a little distance, to not push too hard. The beginning of the push comes, I think, with the equinox. And even then, it's going to probably take a couple of days until we really feel the heat of fiery Aries rocketing us out of our current position.
Yeah, again, it's that same thing of the dissonance of rhythm, because the sun moves into Aries on the 19th and 20th, and yet there's two things that are happening. Even though the sun has moved into Aries, the moon is lagging behind in Pisces, and we're still a couple of days away from a new moon. We'll come back to that in a moment, but that still holds on to the old cycle rather than the new. In addition, as the sun moves into Aries, it's heading toward a conjunction with Mercury, which is moving backwards into the sun, and they align the following day, and then after the new moon, Mercury then moves back into Pisces. So we're kind of, this whole rhythmic topsy-turviness continues throughout the month.
Yeah, it's almost as if when the sun goes into Aries late on the 19th here, early on the 20th other places in the world, that we sort of have we feel the pulse of the new, but we're not out of the old yet. It's sort of like we're between two worlds, because here's the moon, which is mood, habits, feelings. The moon is in Pisces, the last sign of the zodiac, as we just pointed out. And it's at the end of the monthly lunation cycle, that is the cycle of new moons and full moons. And again, here we have the sun firing into Aries, but it's almost as if, okay, I want to go forward, but I'm really not quite ready yet. And that shifts quickly when on the 22nd, the moon, then in fiery, dynamic, initiating, pioneering, go, 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 do it now, Aries, joins the sun, and we have the new moon that really marks the beginning, I think.
Yeah, and this new moon is exactly in between Mercury retrograde, which the following day backs into Pisces, and Uranus. So we have this cluster of Mercury of the mind, Uranus of maybe the nervous system, but still thoughtful and an airy kind of an energy, and the heat of the sun and the moon in impulsive, fire-starting Aries. This is quite a little story here.
Absolutely. Not only do, again, we have the cross currents. Here's the sun and the moon, which is the basic polarity of identity. The sun is will and consciousness. The moon is emotion and feeling. They've joined together in Aries. It's a new moon. It's a new day. But intellectual Mercury is going to back into Pisces and going, let me have another cigarette or another joint or another cup of coffee or another glass of wine before I go forward. And so again, rhythm management is a very interesting issue. Now, we have a new moon every month, or as Rick likes to point out, every month, because the month really is closely based upon the monthly lunation cycle of the sun and the moon, which come together about every 28 days or so. Well, every new moon represents a beginning, regardless of what sign it's in. When we have a new moon in the first sign of the zodiac, in impatient and impulsive Aries, That's a double message about go, 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 go. But any new moon is naive. It's the beginning of a cycle. And a new moon in Aries, which
Double
is
naive.
double naive. So what that means here, again, is that we're likely to feel or get exposed to or have circumstances which have a sort of hurry up feeling, whether we're pressed by conditions outside of us or driven by desires or impulses from the inside. There's this sort of driving force. And I think it's fine to go forward as long as you consider it experimental at first.
Yeah,
Don't
and I
sign long-term contracts.
And I think that your observation of the naivete or innocence, the double naivete or innocence of the new moon plus all those planets in Aries, I think it's important to note that just like in a court of law, in the cosmic realms, ignorance isn't an excuse. Just because you're ignorant doesn't mean that there aren't consequences to the foolish risks that one might take.
Yeah, and not only is this a new moon, not only is it a new moon in Aries, not only is it a new moon in Aries with Mercury who's going, I got to go back in the bar for one more drink.
One more drink.
I'll catch up with you in a few weeks. But Uranus, the planet of revolution and rebellion, is also joined that new moon. Now, in a global level, that may indicate some overthrow of people in positions of authority or power. The sun represents the ruler, what used to be the monarch, what these days tends more often to be elected or selected leaders. Well, Uranus, the planet of revolution, joined with the sun and the moon at the new moon, can be a rebellion against legal authorities. But it's also a rebellion against yourself, against your boss, against other people in your life. And I think that it's healthy to be rebellious as long as you're conscious about what you're doing. Consciousness makes all the difference in the world. If you consciously and intentionally want to tell your boss to buzz off, want to tell your partner that you've had enough, if you've thought it through, if you've been conscious about it, it might be rough, but it's probably the right thing to do. And yet there's a tendency, I think, to let restlessness and rebelliousness arise unconsciously and cause as much chaos and confusion as it does liberation.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what you said, Jeff, that because Mercury is retrograde and at this key 0-degree Aries point moving back into Pisces, I think whatever the rebellion is, whatever the reactionary experiences are, if they are against a power or authority, I don't disagree with that, but whatever they are, these are not new issues. I don't think that this is about any new issues coming to light. It's about stuff that we've been seeing, hearing, thinking about, because that Mercury retrograde is covering old territory.
Right. And I also think on a personal level, what does freedom feel like to you? What would freedom look like? What would freedom feel like? Because Uranus is the planet of freedom and Aries is a sign of independence. It's a double or triple statement about freshness. Now, it's possible that freedom for you might have to do with just being off on your own, and that's not a realistic thing. Maybe economics or family commitment make that impossible for you. But I still think it's worth considering and looking at what freedom might be. Uranus is an outer planet, meaning it's a planet not visible to the naked eye. And all of the outer planets are kind of madness. They all take us beyond the boundaries of the ego or ordinary order in our lives. And feeding the beast will keep it from biting us. And feeding the beast of this new moon is feeding your imagination in terms of what freedom would look like. It doesn't mean you necessarily have to act upon it or go all the way with it, but maybe it'll help you take one step towards freedom, one step of awakening, one step of liberating yourself from patterns that have been holding you back. So I do encourage, rather than overt rebellion, but overt discovery. Imagine that you had all the options in the world. what would you do with them? Now, since few of us have all of those options, almost nobody does, they still may suggest directions or point to ideas that are worth developing later on. So the revolution is with yourself. And what you get is a new level of freedom, at least on an awareness level, which then later, when Mercury goes direct and maybe when you've gotten a few more ducks in a row, you can actually act upon.
So I think what happens is that this grand Earth trine that we talked about earlier acts as a bit of a protector for us through the middle part of the month. And as it wanes toward the end of the month, it's almost like the security troops are withdrawing and we're a little bit more on our own. Now, additionally, I think you talked about something very important here, Jeff, and I want to take it a step further because remember, through March, we have Mercury and Mars moving backward. And by April, both Mercury and Mars turn around. Mercury after only 3 weeks of retrograde and Mars after 10 weeks or so of retrograde. And so in April, we're going to be in new territory, or at least we're going to be moving in a new direction. Right now, even though, and again, this is that dysfunctional rhythm thing, even though by the end of March, we're clearly into spring, into a new season, there's this kind of never land with Mercury now retrograding back into Pisces. But something else happens, and that is that the Sun Uranus conjunction, which is tied up in the new moon on the 22nd, but becomes exact on the 24th. Within a few days after that, the Sun forms a square with Pluto. Now, I want to play that back again because this, I think, becomes the seed for what we talked about last summer, when there was Occupy Everything going on and Arab, spring and summer and so on. And now that energy is a little bit in remission. It's a little latent, even though the stuff is still there. And I think that by the end of March, as the Sun conjuncts Uranus and then squares Pluto, it's going to begin stirring up stuff that will become more and more and more important throughout the spring and into the summer when Uranus and Pluto make its first of 7 90-degree squares that if you keep coming back here, you'll get bored of hearing us talk about because it is the dynamic that we entered into last year and we will be in for the next several years. It is the underlying astrological theme of the unrest, of the revolution, of the revisitation to the energy of the 60s as far as social transformation and art and politics and economics, and yet with a higher level of urgency and a lower level of naivete.
Yeah, what happens is faster moving bodies trigger the patterns of the slower moving bodies. So Uranus and Pluto, which move slowly, don't form their first precise right angle square until this summer, but the Sun will be triggering it later this month. And again, I think at a personal level, it can just bring us to extremes. The extremes of excitement if we're lucky, or the extremes of restlessness or fear if we're not so lucky. But understand, I think one of the purposes of doing astrology is not to say, these are some crappy cycles that are coming up, so you've got a list of excuses as to why you're such a mess. No, what we're trying to do here is to be prescriptive, that if you take some of the medicine of rebellion, of liberation, of freedom, of letting go of what you no longer need, if you recognize this as a healthy and appropriate process, taking a little bit of that medicine means you're unlikely to have the undesirable effects of having your life totally turned inside out. And from a productive and a proactive way, what it's also about is you becoming free and inventive so that we can all become freer and more inventive. Why would we expect those people who are making zillions of dollars on carbon-based energy to really be committed, for example, to more environmentally friendly energy sources. What we can do as individuals, apart from any political or social action, is to liberate ourselves. We each become a node in the consciousness of humanity, so that if you're singing the tune of, oh, I'm free of that neurotic little thing that bothered me, great, that's a social contribution. You are contributing the experience, not the idea, but the real life human experience that change is not only possible, but it's desirable and constructive. So this is yet an opportunity to pick up the ball and do it yourself. And I think, as always in Aries, where the sun will be as of the 19th, where the new moon is on the 22nd, and where Uranus will be for another 5 years or so, is I'll do it myself. Thank you. It doesn't mean that we can't support one another, but it does mean that each one of us is not only responsible for, but capable of being the leader of our own lives. And again, we all have various kinds of restrictions on us, but we've all got some wiggle room. And using that wiggle room to be inventive in terms of who you are, to be excited about discovering and creating something new, is a collective as well as a personal contribution.
Very well said. And I mean, and it reinforces, I think, what we often talk about, and that is there are things out there that are too big to change. But when we change things within, that has social ramifications, it has ramifications in our own lives, individual lives, and the sum total of that, which is what creates those larger changes out there. Now, I want to end my piece of this part of our presentation by saying that when the sun is shining and when we're feeling good mid-month with the grand Earth trine, this is the time to think forward about, as I said earlier, about the storms that may be coming up. Because by the end of the month, when the sun conjuncts Uranus and we're looking at taking risks to do things, to react in a way that can stir up trouble and or freedom and excitement, and then a few days later, on the 29th, when the sun squares Pluto, and we realize that there are very real consequences from these things that we did in innocence and good intention, but we still have to deal with the authority and the power structures and those things which we can't change. By the end of the month, things may not be looking as bright and as positive as they were mid-month when we were under the influence of this wonderful grand trine. And all I want to say is I want to leave us with the thought that awareness is what's key here. So when things are wonderful mid-month, think about what you need to be doing that can help minimize problems at the end of the month. And then at the end of the month, when things may not be quite as bright, remember that this too is transient, and that as things begin to move forward in early and mid-April, there will be movement away from some of those areas of difficulty that you may be experiencing by the end of the month if you apply yourselves in ways that matter at that time.
Good. Thank you, Rick. We're going to take a 10 or 15 minute break. We invite you to be patrons of Soul Food. Rick and I do this as a community experience. Soul Food is such an important part of the community. Doing your shopping here, having meals here, participating in Soul Food is your contribution to all of us and to the community. So we're going to take a 15-minute break. Enjoy Soul Food, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. And remember, thank you. And remember, if you want to put your chart in the hat, so to speak, there is no hat, but on the table, just make sure you put your first name, your birth date, place of birth, and time of day you were born, and we will draw 3 charts and look at them in a few minutes.
koi. Hey nani bibi walandani kore imali sipa kala koi koi. Nani bibi walandani kore imali sipa kala koi koi. Nani bibi walandani kore imali sipa kala koi koi. Nani bibi walandani kore imali sipa kala koi koi. Nani bibi walandani kore imali sipa kala koi koi. Nani bibi walandani kore imali sipa kala koi koi. Mahindi me, mahindi je. 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 Mahindi me, mahindi je.
Let's welcome back Rick and Jeff, everyone.
Not yet.
While Rick is putting the charts in, we've got three people's charts that we're going to look at. And to remind you, what we're doing are just little mini readings. We're going to look at a chart for, I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes, thereabouts. And this is not an in-depth personal analysis. This is a public demonstration of what individual astrology is about. What we've been doing thus far tonight, that's called mundane astrology. Not mundane in the sense of the word meaning ordinary, but mundos, of the world. So that's the collective astrology. And what we're going to be doing now is looking at natal charts, birth charts, based upon individuals' specific time, dates, and place of birth. And what this brings up is the idea that we each live in two primary sets of rhythms. We have our own unique rhythms, which can be derived from our individual birth charts, and yet we swim in the larger fishbowl of collective rhythms. Both of those are operating in our lives all the time. And of course, we run into the rhythms of the people with whom we live, work, or otherwise close with. So,
Shahram, is that you? Are you here? Shahram Namenji? Where are you? I need your birth time. The time of day, or we can't.
he's going to.
Okay.
We'll split the difference. Now, the reason is we astrologers sometimes do charts for people who don't know what time they were born. They just don't know. They have no way to get it. We generally will calculate a chart for noon, knowing that at worst will be 12 hours off. And what happens is, in a birth chart, the sun, moon, and planets don't move very quickly through the zodiac. The body that moves the quickest is the moon. And the moon moves a degree about every 2 hours, changes signs every 2 to 2.5 days. The other planets don't move very quickly, so even if we've got just the vaguest approximation of birth time, we pretty much know where the planets are in terms of the signs and in relationship to one another. What we don't know are the houses. These little sectors called the houses tell us where the energies are going to be expressed, the environments, the circumstances in which they're most likely to be expressed, and those change every 2 hours. So That's why astrologers like to have an accurate birth time. It provides us with more detail. What I often will tell clients, if you don't have a birth time, I can do your chart, but it's like going to see a doctor who doesn't have an x-ray machine. We're missing a tool of analysis, and a fairly important one, but we still have other sources of information.
Okay, so if we've picked your chart, we need you to identify yourself so we know who we're making fun of and ridiculing. No kidding. But we're going to start off with Adrienne. Adrienne,
There she is.
welcome.
Over here.
Born up in the North Country, the real Northwest.
Right. Right. We're the Southeast as far as you're concerned. Just call me Florida.
You're Florida.
Thank you. All right. In looking at this chart, you know, there's no rule as to where you start when you look at a chart. You can start by noticing that there's a cluster of planets up here. This is the 8th and the 9th house of a chart, which would make that area pretty charged up. The 8th house is the area of deep exchange, emotionally, erotically, financially. It's good for counseling. It's good for connecting more deeply. It's about a greater degree of entanglements with others. And what's interesting, however, Adrienne, is that in this 8th house of deep sharing, you have planets in Aries. Leave me the F alone, Aries, which is kind of an interesting contrast. It is about, I think, or at least one version of a life story, which takes a whole life to tell. One version of that is, how do you have intimacy and autonomy? And that would be, I think, a healthy manifestation of this chart. Or how do you trigger change in other people's lives? Aries is a spark plug. We talked about it as the first sign of the zodiac. And you've got it not in a free and easy first house, I'm going to do whatever the hell I want to do. You've got it in an area of the chart that gets you involved more deeply with others, sometimes reluctantly, I would imagine.
Well, yeah, we have a really interesting series of, I'm going to call them dilemmas, because the Aries certainly is independent, but it's a fire sign. It's warm. It's fiery. And with Venus and the Sun both in Aries, that would indicate someone who's ready to go. You know, you want to? Sure. Well, I didn't even tell you, I didn't even say what I was asking yet. That doesn't matter. I want to. I mean, the Aries is ready to go. And yet, Adrian's Sun is conjuncting Chiron, the wounded healer, which often puts some sort of early wound, some sort of something that makes one afraid that something in the present is going to be similar to something in the past. And it's square Saturn very closely, which is like having all these reasons not to do things, or all these things that you have to overcome in order to get to where it is you want to be. And so even though there's this sense of immediacy and warmth and intensity and fire right up front, there's 100 reasons why you don't get to do what you want to do. And then we have Venus in, again, hot Aries, opposite Pluto and square Mars, which is Aries' key planet, in holding back Cancer. There's a lot of intensity, a lot of passion, but I don't think it comes to the surface all that easy, which would corroborate what you were saying about that 8th house depth.
Yeah, this is not the chart of a what the hell kind of Aries, not at all. As Rick pointed out, Saturn, the planet of hard-cold reality, guilt/responsibility, was at a right angle to the sun, making you aware of restraints. And the moon of emotion or feeling is in the deepest, darkest sign, Scorpio. I have a moon in Scorpio as well. Traditional astrology didn't consider that a comfy place for the moon, because the moon is about nurturance and Scorpio is about transformation. And you know, a kind of soul's choice of the moon in Scorpio is, I'd rather have intensity and suffer a little pain for it than have things be so nice, easy, and breezy. So here's where we look for similarities. Your sun is in the 8th house. Your moon is in the 8th sign, Scorpio. And Venus, as Rick pointed out, the planet of love, is opposite Pluto, the planet associated with Scorpio, the 8th sign. So there's a lot of 8, and 8 is, again, that deep engagement, that more psychological, mysterious, digging up kind of stuff.
And Mars relates to both the sun in Aries, Mars is the ruler of Aries, and Scorpio, and Mars is 90 degrees or square to Pluto. Mars and Pluto, are having their own little battle going on. There's intensity here, and yet I think there are trust issues. There's and maybe those trust issues are, do I really trust you enough to handle the intensity and the depth and the stuff that I'm bringing to you? Because if I don't, then you ain't getting it. And if I do, you better handle it good or I'm going to kill you.
And I also think there's a natural desire in this chart to simplify things. And you're not a simple person at all. You're pretty complex. I'm saying that because Mercury, the planet of lower mind, that's data collection, and Jupiter, the planet of higher mind, that's philosophy and meaning, are joined together in Taurus, next to the karmic moon south node, all of which is in Taurus, all of which is about, there should be a simple answer to this. And yet I think that part of your life experience is to learn how to accept and deal with complexity and mystery and the nuance of shade and shadow, even though both Aries and Taurus would like to blow all that complexity out of the water. I think having to deal with it is part of your story.
And I think one further complicating factor, and I like what you said, Jeff, and I think a further complicating factor is this irritating quincunx between Neptune and Mars. We already know Mars is important because it's the key planet of both Aries and Scorpio, Aries Sun, Scorpio Moon. Mars in Cancer holds the energy in. It's passive aggressive. It needs to get pretty pissed off before it does something, and when it does something, the person it does it to might not even know it. Not that it won't hurt, but it might not know it. Now, with that Mars so tightly quincunx to Neptune, it's almost like the spiritual out that other people get isn't an easy out for you. That in some way, spirituality tied to beliefs, to religion, to imagination are more complicated. And it's not necessarily just some place where you can just go meditate and go to. Not that you don't have a spiritual practice. It's just that it's not that simple.
Yeah. And besides, I'd like to encourage you to be a troublemaker. I think because you have the North Node, the point of growth or integration in Scorpio. You have the Sun in fire starter Aries in the 8th house. And the other thing, Mars, the warrior, which Rick pointed out, Mars in Cancer doesn't like to be overtly aggressive. And your Mars is kind of weird. It's hooked up with Neptune, which makes you super sensitive. And yet it's also hooked up with Pluto, which says you know how to kill. This is like
Ninja woman.
Right, contract killer who grows violets is a hobby. It's sort of this mix. Although I don't think the aggressive side is seen that much. I think Rick is right. It may be a little bit more hidden. But I think it's good for you and healthy to own your power and own the fact that if we're going to know you, we're going to be changed in ways. We're going to be affected. You're going to put your finger on things. You're going to point things out. You're going to bring things up which aren't always comfortable, although that might be desirable for you, but they're not always, and I think that's fine. Scorpio and Aries are both associated with Mars. And Mars is not about maintaining the status quo as much as it would like to in Cancer. It's about pushing things ahead.
I would imagine that this past year has not been the easiest year for you.
Saturn opposed your Sun.
And that's not done yet even. I think
Right.
Saturn is right there. But I think even going back about a year or so, Saturn was lining up about a year and a half ago with Pluto opposite your Venus, and then it squared your Mars. This is a frustrating year because I don't think you had the resources to do everything you wanted to do, and yet there were things in your way. It wasn't a feel-good situation that you maybe either had to or are in the process of either separating yourself from or it separating itself from you, because with Saturn now opposite your Sun and squaring its own place. Again, for someone else, this may be tougher. For you, this is stuff that you already know. Saturn is always squaring your sun, so you know how to deal with periods of adversity and or deal with periods where you don't have what it is that you want. And yet I think now is a time where you maybe have had to, and even continue now through for the next several months, have to work harder and not necessarily get the results that you want. And it's okay because it's the finishing of some old karma of a cycle that I think will play itself out by later on in the year.
Yeah, I think it's about status. It's about having a position, having a title, a position, a place, a role, either being discontent where you are or having an ambition that you're having to work toward. But it is constructive too, I think. Thank you, Adrian. Okay.
Okay. Stephanie.
Stephanie. So we have Stephanie in the house. Hi, Stephanie. So here's your chart. Oh, that's nice. What's rising in the east? Our astrological chart. Well, it's superficially nice. Let's not get carried away. But our astrological charts are the reverse of conventional maps. We put south at the top, north at the bottom, and flip east and west, because in the northern hemisphere, if we're looking at the sun, moon, and planets move through the sky, we're looking towards the south. So this is the eastern point, the rising point, and what I said, oh, that's nice, is that Stephanie is Gemini rising, and the rising's your persona, your appearance, but she has Venus, a planet of charm and grace and beauty that's rising, so the niceness of a Venus rising person is they want to be nice, and they want us to think that they're nice, and that's very nice. Thank you.
Well, and it's also Venus in Gemini, and that's the same degree of Gemini that I have rising. But Gemini rising appears more facile and interesting and interested than they might really be. It's easy to do that engaging dance of interaction. And with Venus there, it's like everything seems like it could be a wonderful distraction. Venus in Gemini doesn't want that. It wants that and that and that. Because Gemini is about multiplicity and Venus is about what we like. And so Venus in Gemini on the ascendant is this kind of interaction with the world of being attracted to the next distraction because it's enjoyment.
Well, it's also a way to cover up your deep resentment and disappointment. Well, I'm exaggerating a little. You have the moon of emotion and feeling in Leo. And having the moon of feeling in Leo is the need to feel important. Leo is important. Leo is associated with the sun, the central star of our solar system. Having the moon in Leo says there's some drama emotionally, and the need to be perceived of as a star, as someone important. Yet Pluto, the mythological lord of the underworld, was in a 90-degree square, a right angle, an angle of challenge with that moon, which means, hold it, you haven't been allowed to be as open or as showing off or expressing your needs. Maybe it was your overly controlling, manipulative, fearful, or narcissistic mother who presented an unfavorable model for that. That's just one cruel way of looking at it. But what it really means is, I think, that learning to be selective is really important for you. That given the choice of being easily satisfied by a little of this or a little of this, which would be Venus and Gemini rising. Rick's a Gemini rising and I'm Venus and Gemini, so we both understand Gemini wants to make things easy. You know, if I can't have that, I'll have one of those. What the heck? It's all the same.
Or two.
Or two, or three. But I think that moon Pluto means to take your needs and your desires more seriously. And that I think it's worth it to give up some short-term ease and an okay experience to go through some struggle to get it deeper and more richly satisfying.
I think a key word you just said is struggle. Because I think the moon square Pluto often is a struggle to either find, maintain, or to express one's power, because that power has been taken away perhaps early on by family situation or whatever. There's a sense of having had one's boundaries violated either physically, mentally, whatever, and so that Pluto square moon wants to regain its power. But interesting, and you said this early on without pointing, without, and I don't even know whether you came
No.
from this point or
No.
not, but you used the word security. And the sun is in Cancer. And regardless of all of this, you know, oh, let's do this, I'm going to do this, this is fun, okay, all of that kind of nice, light, easygoing outward appearance, regardless of the intense, deeper need to drive the emotions to some place that's really powerful and really meaningful, the sun in Cancer ultimately wants to feel safe. It's almost like you don't get to play. That's the Venus in Gemini rising, unless the sun in Cancer feels protected or safe. If you're out on the edge, play is no fun at all. But if you have that sense of stability and structure and safety with the sun in Cancer, well, then it's easier to let go of some of the history or the fears and to do the dance.
Yeah, and I think that Venus rising in Gemini is, I want to be pleasing. See, if I'm pleasing and entertaining, maybe the pressure, the intensity, whatever is there that you grew up with that was complex will not get you, or it will keep the dragon from shooting flames out of its mouth.
Mars at 0 Aries.
Right. But
Square Mercury.
this is the house of partnership, and you have Saturn, the planet of control. You have Uranus, the planet of freedom, and you have Neptune, the planet of dissolving. And what I think that means is, if you try to tap dance around someone else, it'll just make you crazy. That the idea of pleasing others who are inconsistent, do they want freedom now? Do they want order? Am I allowed to be free? I think it's really important to focus on what you want and what you need and grow from there. That doesn't mean you can't be a pleasing, loving, kind person, but it's just a matter of priorities. And I think for almost all of us, putting ourselves first is clearer and honest, but here I think it's very important.
And as far as timing goes, I mean, the thing that stands out to me is a year ago, well, starting a year ago last March, when Uranus moved into Aries, it lined up with your Mars, and that might have been a first taste of explosive, crazy, wild freedom, kapow, you know, just doing something that in some way was about you, and yet it squared the Mercury, which may in fact be, yes, this is exciting, but I need to think this all out. It's not working mentally. There's something that I need to kind of work with here.
Yeah, it's appropriate this year to be both brilliant and a little crazy. I don't mean that clinically, and I just simply mean that your mind is processing stuff that's all over the map. And if you try to bring it down to earth to make sense out of it, it can be difficult. If you're relaxed and flexible and you go, that's a weird thought, I don't know what to do with it, but let's go on, you can have mental breakthroughs. I mean, the freedom that you've wanted in action over the next year, it takes some intellectual follow through, whether it's learning, studying, communicating, or just getting the new pictures in your mind. I think there are new pictures coming up over the next
agree.
year.
And I think that the problems arise from the resistance to the change or to the new ideas or whatever, that somehow letting go and going with it, it may not be, the currents may not be carrying you where you ultimately want to go, but you'll have more energy to go where you want to go when the currents slow down than if you spend all your time fighting them now. Then the currents slow down, you're exhausted, you don't get to go where you want to go anyhow.
Right, fighting to stay on a course that's constantly shifting inside of you is, it's a good image. Yeah, it can be exhausting. Trust a little bit of that moving all over the place. It'll settle down. Okay? Thank you, Stephanie. All right, we're going to look at one more chart.
That was a guarded okay. That was a sun in
Well,
Cancer. Okay.
you know, again, this obviously is not in-depth counseling, and it's not presented in the privacy and with the sensitivity that you know, you pay for. This is the free stuff. Okay, so we have Sharam's chart.
And you were born in Kirkland? No. I can't hear you.
In Tehran? Okay. Yeah, that'll change things.
Yeah, that's just for the record, not what this says. I just
All right. Give him a break. The time is what?
Wait.
How'd you get that? You just called. You called Iran?
Okay, so wait, stop. Tell me the time again.
12:30 in the morning or the afternoon? 12:30 a.m.
12:30
30
a.m.
in
in Tehran.
right.
H-E?
I don't know.
Tehran.
R-A-N.
R-A-N.
That's not Tehran, Washington. No, we'll get there. We spelt it. Maybe it's T-E-H-R-A-N. Okay, take the E out. And then country.
Does that work? Country.
No, you have to change it to Iran. You have Lebanon.
Iran. I had Lebanon.
Yeah.
All right, let's try that. There we go.
Yes.
Whoops.
All right. We have an astrological chart, folks.
And we have a grand trine, different than, but not too different
That's
than
right.
the grand trine we've been talking about that is cooking this month in March. We talked earlier about the grand trine of 3 planets, actually 4 planets in Earth signs. And that grand trine that we talked about that's happening now is happening on points that are corresponding with your natal or birth chart. Even at the same degree, the moon is at 9 degrees. The grand trine of mid-March is at 9 degrees of Earth. So your moon at 9 degrees of earthy Taurus, trine Pluto at 5, almost 6 degrees of earthy Virgo, trine Mercury, Saturn, and the Sun all in Capricorn. There's some real stability and tradition built into your
If
chart.
I give you some money, will you buy some lottery tickets for me? Well, Venus and Jupiter, as we said, come together once a year. They're the 2 most fortunate planets in astrology's tradition, and they're coming together exactly on your moon. I mean, your birth time, even if it's off an hour, it's still going to be right on top of your moon. You are coming into a period of potential for some real rich reward. Now, whether they're directly material, directly physical, or simply just getting it. Getting the picture of how to do the business, the deal, the thing, whatever it is, boy, you are really ripe for a very nice, if not a payoff, just building an amazingly solid material foundation.
Well, except for the fact that Neptune opposes the moon natally. Now, that doesn't necessarily take away from what Jeff said, but with Neptune opposing the moon in your birth chart, it's the stability that one should have from a Taurus moon for you isn't quite as stable because your imagination, your spiritual world, your dreams, your creativity always come into play. And even when things are real and even when they look and seem real, it's hard to tell which is out there and which is your imagination.
Well, that I think is part of the challenge is you like the chase as much as you like winning. The reason is you have 3 planets in Sagittarius. While Earth wants to have concrete results, Sagittarius, the half horse, half archer, is shooting the arrow up in the sky and wants to go there. You have Mars, the planet of action, Jupiter, the planet of expansion, and Venus, the planet of pleasure, all in Sagittarius. So it's like, given the choice, it would be a dilemma for you to say, guess what? You can win whatever looks like the jackpot for you, and then you just have to live with that the rest of your life. No other adventures, no big hunts, personal, professional, or otherwise. Boy, that's kind of a dilemma because you have a real builder's chart. You're an earthy Capricorn with Saturn, the planet of responsibility, next to your sun, and the moon in Taurus, and yet there are other parts that are much, much more adventurous.
Oh yeah, you got to do things your way. That Uranus is harmoniously trine to a Jupiter-Mars conjunction in Sagittarius. This is the part of you that gets excited and enthused about crazy shit, and then somehow makes it happen.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Yeah,
you know,
and don't be fooled by how agreeable he is, because he's going to do what he wants anyway. The rising sign is what we see, and Sharam has lovely sociable Libra rising. Hi. How would you like
what
me
do
to
you
be?
want? What do you
right.
want?
What do you want? What
No,
can
what
I
do you-
do for
whatever
you?
you
No,
want.
no, no.
No,
Whatever
Tom,
you
yeah,
want.
yeah.
No. You first. But he's going to do what the hell he wants anyway. I mean, it's he's got Mars, the action planet, with Jupiter. He knows better.
and he has Venus square Pluto. Interesting. We've had 3 charts tonight. One with Venus square Pluto, one with the Moon square Pluto, and one with Venus opposition Pluto. And these are all charts of, however nice it is on the surface, there's something else going on. You know, there's more stuff that's happening that's very powerful, profound, intense, and is not going to just be lightly, you know, oh, it'll be okay.
Yeah.
No, it won't be okay, you fucker. You know, whatever. You know, I mean, there's a sense of it's not going to be brushed off lightly.
Oh yeah. And again, this is a great chart for high stakes gambler, because at the core you've got this Capricorn seriousness. You're not a foolish man at all. You're a very serious man, but you like foolish games. You like games. And so that high stakes gambling in life really fits.
Yeah, and especially with the Saturn conjunct
Yeah.
the Sun.
Yeah.
I mean, there really is a sense of if there's a mountain, it's impossible to get to the top. You'll take the risk to get to the top rather than playing whatever the game is to get a comfortable position halfway up. Because and you'll get to the top because you'll come back with a scheme, a system, a something that if it doesn't work, you'll go back to the drawing board and prove it, and you'll do it until you get it right. And it'll somehow seem like he, pulled it out of his butt or something, but there's really hard work behind that kind of easygoing, kind of cavalier appearance that you can present. But behind it,
It's calculated.
Yeah, it's calculated.
You're very calculating, but you like risk at the same time. So most people, when we think of them as calculating, we think of them as being very cautious. That their calculation is meant to protect the world, and I think your calculation is meant to expand your world.
And I was gonna say, and we have Pluto these days going over that entire section of your chart, which I think you're already deep into this process. But this is like a total, here we have the metamorphosis of the caterpillar becoming the butterfly. And yet, halfway through this process, it's not a pretty picture for either. Because the caterpillar's already gone, mush, ooze, gop. And the butterfly hasn't come together on its higher level yet. And I think that's where you are in your life. The caterpillar's done and the butterfly hasn't risen. It'll take another couple years, for this transmutation, transformation to really complete itself. But this is a once in a lifetime kind of process. And you certainly have already faced some of the opening game or some of the opening moves to this game as Saturn moved through mid-Libra. Over the last year as it squared the Sun and Saturn.
Yeah, I think the really good news, in addition to having all this sweet stuff this month, is that to operate on a big scale. I mean, it fits your personality, but the cycles are there to say, go for the big one. And I agree with Rick, it may take you a couple of years to go through the process. The hard part for you is maybe ending things. They may end in a messy way sometimes.
Why do you say that?
Well, because of Neptune rising in the South Node in Pisces, and the part of you that goes, all right, I'm up for the big game, the big challenge to do. Once it starts rolling and you know where it's going to go, you're not that interested anymore. So, but learning how to complete the game, I think more neatly is a good and healthy thing for you. Okay? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you, each of you.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, SoulFood. Thank you. Have a great month.
And Thank you, Adrian and Stephanie and Sharam for
Or
sharing.
Kirkland. Kirkland,
Yeah,
that's what.
yeah. We'll just call you Kirkland. Okay. I gotta play the catch.
No, not until the morning.
Well, I know, but I gotta start running for it now.
Are you taking care?
I'm just gonna try it myself. For a few
Hey,
weeks.
I would like to see you.
Will you be my dad?
Rick, have a good trip.
I'll be online and I'll talk to you. I'll talk to you.
I like your shirt.
You gotta scan or take a picture of that sometime.
Oh man.
I'll catch you here sometime and I'll
Okay.
That's fine.
It's fine.
It's good. I'd like that.
Thank you.